The shuttle doors opened with a hiss, and Elias Voss stepped onto the steel floor of Verath Prime for the first time. The air tasted different here, recycled, cold, and carrying the faint smell of metal and something organic he could not name. He was 19 years old, carried one bag over his shoulder, and had traveled 4 months across 3 relay gates to reach the Galactic Union Military Academy. He was one of 3 humans in the entire intake year. The station world was enormous. Curved hallways stretched in every direction, lined with glowing panels that shifted color depending on the species walking beneath them. Elias watched as creatures of every shape moved past him, tall ones, short ones, ones with too many arms, ones with no arms at all. Some walked, some floated. A few crawled along the walls using sticky limbs. None of them looked at him twice. Humans were new to the Union. Earth had been accepted only 4 years ago, and most species still treated humanity like a temporary guest who might be asked to leave at any moment. Elias understood this. He did not expect a warm welcome, and he did not receive one. His barracks assignment was Block 7, a mixed species unit on the Academy's lower ring. When he walked through the door with his bag, 12 aliens turned to look at him. The room went quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then they went back to whatever they were doing, as if he was not worth the pause. The bunks were built for different body types. Some were wide stone slabs for the heavy species. Others were hanging nets for the climbers. Elias found the one marked with a human standard tag and dropped his bag on it. The mattress was thin and hard. He had slept on worse. "You are the human." The voice came from above. Elias looked up and saw a massive figure stepping down from an upper platform. He was a Dreven nearly 7 feet tall, covered in dark green scales, with 4 muscular arms and a jaw that could crack stone. His name, Elias would learn, was Toron. "That is me," Elias said. Toron looked him over the way a butcher looks at a small cut of meat, smaller than I expected. "Most things are next to you." A few nearby cadets made low sounds, the alien version of a chuckle. Toron did not laugh. He stared at Elias for a long moment, then turned and walked away without another word. The message was clear enough. Toron was the top of the food chain in Block 7, and Elias was somewhere near the bottom. Over the next few days, Elias learned how the academy worked. It was not like any military school on Earth. Here, rank among cadets was not given by instructors. It was taken. The culture was built on dominance, who was strongest, who was loudest, who could make others back down with a look or a shove. Species like the Dreven and the Korvathi, dense-boned insectoids who stood like armored tanks, sat at the top. Smaller or quieter species stayed out of the way. Elias stayed out of the way too, not because he was afraid, but because he was watching. During the first week, the cadets went through orientation sparring assessments. Each cadet was tested for strength, speed, reflexes, and endurance. Elias stood in line and waited his turn. When the drill commander, a scarred Korvathi named Rek, called his name, Elias stepped onto the mat. The tests were simple: lift, strike, react, run. Elias scored average on strength, below average on raw striking power. His reflexes were acceptable, but when the endurance test came, a continuous run on an increasing gravity treadmill, something unusual happened. The machine kept increasing the difficulty. One by one, the other cadets had dropped off at various levels. Elias kept running. His legs burned. His lungs screamed, but he kept running. Drill Commander Rek watched the readings on his data pad and said nothing. He marked something in the file and told Elias to step off. Elias was ranked near the bottom overall because of his size and mass, but the endurance number sat in his file like a quiet alarm that nobody bothered to read. The hazing started on day 4. It was never anything obvious, nothing that would trigger an official complaint. Toron's Circle, a group of 7 or 8 cadets from various species, simply made Elias' life harder in small ways. They blocked his seat in the mess hall so he had to eat standing. They shouldered him in the corridors hard enough to knock him off balance. They spoke about humans in loud voices when he was nearby, calling Earth a rock full of animals who learned to wear clothes. Elias said nothing. He ate his food standing. He caught his balance in the corridors. He let the words pass through him like wind through an open window. The only cadet who spoke to him with any real curiosity was Seal, a Huron female. The Huron were a canid species, wolf-like in appearance, with silver-white fur and large amber eyes. They were natural empaths, able to sense the emotions of those around them. Seal was quiet and observant, and she watched Elias the way a scientist watches an experiment. One evening, she sat beside him on the observation deck, while he ate a ration bar alone. "You do not fight back," she said. "They see this as submission." "I know what they see," Elias said. "Then why allow it? Among my people, to accept dominance without challenge is to accept the lowest place forever." Elias chewed slowly and looked out at the stars beyond the viewport. Thousands of them, scattered like dust across black glass. "I am not submitting," he said. "I am waiting." Seal tilted her head. Her empathic senses reached toward him, and what she felt made her fur rise slightly along her neck. There was no fear in him, no sadness, no resignation. What she felt beneath his calm surface was something she had no Huron word for: a patient, coiled energy, like a spring pressed flat and held in place by nothing but will. She pulled her senses back and said nothing more. Elias finished his ration bar, folded the wrapper neatly, and walked back to his bunk. He lay down on the thin mattress, closed his eyes, and slept like a man who had nothing in the world to worry about. The cadets of Block 7 looked at him, and saw a small, soft creature from a young species that had no business being here. They had no idea what they were looking at. 3 weeks passed. Elias attended every class, completed every drill, and spoke only when necessary. He sat in the back of lecture halls, took notes on a battered data pad, and kept his head down. The other cadets had mostly stopped noticing him. He had become background noise, the quiet human who did not matter. That changed on a Tuesday morning in the Galactic History and Ethics Hall. The lecture room was shaped like a bowl, with rising rows of seats surrounding a central stage where the instructor stood. Over 100 cadets from different species filled the seats. The air was warm and carried the mixed scents of a dozen biologies. Elias sat in the third row from the top, near the back wall. The instructor that day was Professor Carl Vane, a thin, elderly Dreven with faded scales and a voice like dry paper. He activated the display screen behind him, and a massive image appeared, a space station, broken and burning, surrounded by the wreckage of ships. "The Siege of Hollow Sun," Professor Vane said. "Galactic Standard Year 4812. A coalition fleet of 6 species surrounded and bombarded Hollow Sun Station for 11 days to eliminate an insurgent force hiding among the civilian population. When the siege ended, the insurgents were destroyed, along with 42,000 civilians." He let the number hang in the air. The Union Council approved this action. The military commanders who carried it out were decorated. This event is considered one of the key moments that stabilized the Outer Reach territories. He paused and looked across the room. "I want your analysis. Was this decision correct?" Toron's hand went up first. He sat in the front row, as he always did, surrounded by his circle. His voice was loud and certain. "It was efficient," Toron said. "The insurgents were embedded in the population. Surgical removal was impossible. The coalition had 2 choices: accept ongoing attacks for years or end the problem in 11 days. They chose the faster path. 42,000 died so that millions could live in stability. The math is simple." Several cadets nodded. A Corvathi in the middle rows clicked his mandibles in agreement. The room seemed to settle into consensus. Then Elias raised his hand. Professor Vane looked up at him with mild surprise. The human had never spoken in his class before. "Cadet Voss." Elias lowered his hand and spoke in a calm, even voice that carried clearly through the room. "The math is not simple. It is wrong. Toron turned in his seat to look at him. The room shifted. The Hollow Sun siege did not end the insurgency in the Outer Reach, Elias continued. It expanded it. Within 3 years of the bombardment, insurgent recruitment in surrounding systems increased by 400%. The 42,000 civilians who died had families, friends, and communities. Those survivors did not see the coalition as protectors. They saw them as murderers, and murderers create enemies. He spoke without notes. His voice was not loud, but it was steady and precise, and it filled the silence between his words with a weight that made cadets lean forward to listen. On Earth, we fought wars like this for centuries. We bombed cities full of civilians to break the will of our enemies. It never worked. Not once. Every time, it created a new generation of fighters with nothing left to lose. The coalition made the same mistake at Hollow Sun because they believed that killing enough people would solve the problem. But violence without understanding does not end conflict. It feeds it. Professor Vane watched him with an expression that was difficult to read. You are comparing human wars to galactic-scale conflict, Cadet Voss. That is a large leap. War does not change because the battlefield gets bigger, sir. Only the body count does. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. Cadets exchanged glances. Nobody had spoken to a professor or to Toron like this in the history of Block 7. Toron stood up slowly. He did not look at the professor. He looked directly at Elias, and his 4 hands were curled into fists at his sides. You lecture us about war, Toron said, his voice low and dangerous, when your species spent its entire history killing each other over patches of dirt. Humans did not even leave their own planet until the Union found them fighting in the mud like animals. And now you sit here and tell us, species who have traveled the stars for 10,000 years, that we do not understand violence. He took a step up the aisle toward Elias. You are savages. Your people are savages. You dress it up with words and history, but underneath, you are nothing but clever animals who learn to speak. The room held its breath. Elias looked at Toron without blinking. His face showed nothing, no anger, no shame, no fear. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, but somehow it carried even further. You are right, Elias said. We are savages. Toron blinked, caught off guard. The difference, Elias continued, is that we learned from it, you have not. The silence that followed was absolute. Seal, sitting 4 rows to the left, felt the emotional shift in the room like a wave of cold water. She reached out with her empathic senses toward Elias, and what she found chilled her. He was not angry. He was not afraid. What burned inside him was something far more dangerous, a calm, absolute resolve, like a blade that had already decided where to fall. Toron's scales darkened, a driven sign of deep rage. His nostrils flared. Every cadet in the room knew what was coming before he said the words. I challenge you, Toron said. Dominance right tonight, Block 7 common floor. A dominance challenge was an old academy tradition, technically against regulations, but tolerated by the instructors as a way to let cadets settle disputes. It was supposed to be a ritualized shoving match, a display of strength that ended when one side backed down. But the way Toron said the words left no room for ritual. He meant to hurt Elias. He meant to break him in front of everyone. Elias stood up from his seat. He was a full foot shorter than Toron. He looked up at the Driven and nodded once. I accept. Professor Vane said nothing. He turned back to his display screen and resumed the lecture as if nothing had happened. But his old eyes followed Elias as the human sat back down, and something flickered in them that might have been recognition. Word spread through the academy in less than an hour. By midday, every cadet in Block 7 knew. By evening, cadets from other blocks were finding excuses to visit. Bets were placed on data pads across the station. The odds were not complicated. Toron was 7 feet tall, had 4 arms, and outweighed Elias by over 100 pounds of scaled muscle. No one bet on the human. Seal found Elias in the equipment bay that afternoon, sitting alone on a bench, wrapping his hands with strips of training cloth. She sat across from him and watched his fingers move, slow, precise, practiced. "You cannot win this," she said. "Maybe not. He will bring his circle, you know this. It will not be a fair fight." "I know. Then why did you accept?" Elias finished wrapping his right hand and flexed it once, testing the tightness. He looked at Seal, and for the first time she saw something behind his eyes that was not patience or calm. It was older than that. It was the look of someone who had been in dark places before and had come out the other side carrying lessons that cost more than she could imagine. "This was always going to happen," he said. "Better now on my terms." He wrapped his left hand, stood up, and walked toward the door. Seal watched him go and felt a shiver run along her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The common floor of Block 7 had been cleared. Someone had pushed the tables and storage crates to the walls, leaving a wide circle of open steel floor under the cold white lights. By the time the station clock hit 2100 hours, nearly 50 cadets were packed into the room. They lined the walls, sat on crates, and perched on upper railings. The air was thick with tension and the mixed body heat of a dozen species. No instructors were present. That was part of the tradition. What happened on the common floor stayed on the common floor. Toron arrived first. He walked through the crowd with his forearms hanging loose at his sides and his dark green scales catching the light. Behind him came 9 others, his inner circle. 3 were Driven like him, 2 were Korvathi with their hard exoskeletons and heavy limbs, and the rest were a mix of other species, all large, all loyal to Toron. They spread out in a loose wall behind him, blocking the far side of the ring. The message was clear to everyone in the room. This was not going to be 1 against 1. Elias walked in from the opposite side 3 minutes later. He was alone. He wore a simple gray training shirt and standard-issue pants. His hands were still wrapped in the cloth strips from earlier. He moved through the crowd without hurrying, and the cadets parted to let him through, not out of respect, but because they wanted a clear view of what they believed would be a short and painful event. He stepped into the center of the ring and stood still. He rolled his neck once to the left, then to the right. He shook out his wrists. Every motion was small, relaxed, and precise. A few of the Euron empaths in the crowd tilted their heads. Something about the human's energy had changed since the afternoon. He was calmer than they had ever felt him, not the calm of surrender, but the calm of something that had already made every decision it needed to make. Toron stepped forward until he was 3 feet from Elias. He towered over the human. His shadow covered Elias completely. "Last chance, animal," Toron said. "Walk away." Elias looked up at him. "No." Toron moved fast for his size. He brought his 2 upper arms forward in a massive shove aimed at Elias' chest, enough force to send a grown human crashing into the far wall. It was a move that had ended every challenge Toron had ever faced. His hands closed on empty air. Elias had sidestepped. Not jumped, not stumbled, sidestepped, one smooth motion to the right, like water flowing around a stone. Toron's own momentum carried him forward 2 steps past where Elias had been standing. A few cadets in the crowd made sounds of surprise. Someone laughed. Toron spun around, and this time there was real fury in his eyes. He came at Elias with all 4 arms swinging, upper pair reaching to grab, lower pair driving forward to strike. It was overwhelming force, the kind that left no room for defense. Elias ducked under the first grab. He parried the second arm with his left forearm, redirecting it outward. In the same motion, he stepped inside Toron's reach, into the space where those 4 arms could not build power, and drove a single strike upward into the soft tissue beneath Toron's jaw. It was not a wild punch. It was a targeted blow, delivered with the heel of his palm, aimed at the nerve cluster that sat just below the Driven skull plate. Toron's eyes went blank. His 4 arms dropped. His legs folded beneath him, and he collapsed onto the steel floor like a falling tree. The sound of his body hitting the ground echoed through the silent room. He was unconscious before he landed. For 2 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. 50 aliens stared at the 7-foot Driven lying flat on the floor and the human standing over him. Hands still raised, breathing normally. Then the 9 rushed him. They came from all sides, a wall of scales, chitin and muscle. A Corvathi charged from the left with its armored shoulder lowered like a battering ram. 2 Driven came from the right with their arms spread wide. The others closed in from behind. Ilias moved. He dropped low under the Corvathi's charge, letting the insectoid's momentum carry it over him, and drove his elbow into the joint where its primary arm connected to its thorax. There was a wet pop, and the arm went limp. The Corvathi screamed a high, clicking sound and stumbled sideways, clutching its dislocated limb. Ilias was already turning. The first Driven reached him with a sweeping grab. Ilias caught the alien's lower wrist, pivoted his hips, and used the Driven's own weight against him. The throw was textbook, a hip toss that sent the 7-foot reptilian flying into the 2 cadets behind him. All 3 went down in a tangle of limbs and cursing. A stocky alien with thick gray skin swung at Ilias from behind. Ilias sensed the motion, felt the air shift, and rolled his shoulder just enough to let the fist graze past his ear. He countered with a short, sharp hook to the alien's exposed ribs. The creature folded and dropped to its knees, gasping. 5 down, 5 still standing. 8 seconds had passed. The remaining 5 tried to coordinate. They spread out and came at him together, trying to cut off his movement. It was a smart tactic. It lasted about 3 seconds. Ilias picked the weakest angle, a gap between a young Driven and a wiry alien he did not recognize, and exploded through it. He hit the Driven with a knee to the midsection that doubled the alien over, then spun and caught the wiry one with a precise kick to the outside of its knee. The joint bent the wrong way, and the alien went down howling. A Huron, one of Tauron's pack allies, charged at Ilias with teeth bared and claws extended. Ilias sidestepped the lunge and delivered a single punch to the Huron's liver. It was a body shot so precise, so perfectly placed, that the empathic cadets watching from the crowd physically flinched. They felt the pain secondhand, a white-hot flash that radiated through their senses like a shockwave. The Huron crumpled to the floor, conscious but unable to move, whimpering through clenched teeth. The second Corvathi, the last one standing, hesitated. It looked at the 8 bodies on the floor. It looked at Ilias, who stood in the center of the ring with his fists raised, his breathing only slightly faster than normal, a thin line of blood running from a split in his lower lip. The Corvathi charged anyway, respect for courage. Ilias met the charge head-on. He absorbed the impact with bent knees, wrapped his arm around the Corvathi's thick neck and applied a chokehold, not a crush, but a controlled squeeze on the blood vessels along the side of the neck. The Corvathi thrashed for 4 seconds, then 5, then its movement slowed and its eyes dimmed. Ilias held the pressure for 2 more seconds, then carefully, almost gently, lowered the unconscious alien to the floor. He stood up. The ring was silent. 10 aliens lay on the steel floor around him, some unconscious, some groaning, some staring at the ceiling with blank, stunned expressions. Tauron had not moved from where he had fallen. Ilias stood in the center of it all. His wrapped hands hung at his sides. The split lip bled slowly. A dark bruise was forming on his left forearm where someone's fist had connected. Those were his only injuries. 38 seconds. That was how long the entire fight had lasted from the moment Tauron hit the floor to the moment the last Corvathi closed its eyes. Someone with a data pad had timed it. The number would be repeated across the academy for weeks. Ilias looked around the room. 50 faces stared back at him, eyes wide, mouths open, mandibles frozen, fur standing on end. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. He did not smile. He did not shout. He did not beat his chest or make threats. He looked at the crowd with the same calm, steady expression he had worn since the moment he walked in. "We are done here," he said. Then he stepped over Toron's body, walked through the crowd, and disappeared down the corridor toward his bunk. The cadets parted for him without a word. Behind him, the common floor of Block 7 looked like a battlefield, and somewhere in the back of the crowd, Seal stood with her amber eyes wide and her fur pressed flat against her body. Her empathic senses were still reaching toward the space where Elias had stood, still searching for the spike of rage or the rush of adrenaline that should have been there. She found nothing. Throughout the entire 38 seconds, his emotional state had never changed. Not once. He had fought 10 aliens and dropped them all with the same steady calm as a man folding laundry. That was the part that scared her most. By morning, the footage was everywhere. Someone had placed a small camera drone in the upper corner of the common floor before the fight. The recording was shaky, the audio was muffled, but the image was clear enough. A single human cadet dismantling 10 aliens in 38 seconds with a kind of violence that looked less like fighting and more like surgery. The clip spread through the Academy's private networks within hours. By the next afternoon, it had reached stations beyond Verath Prime. Elias learned about the recording when he walked into the mess hall for breakfast, and every single cadet in the room stopped talking. He picked up a tray, took his food, found an empty table, and ate alone. The silence followed him like a shadow. In the medical bay, the damage report was being assembled. Toron had a severe concussion and nerve trauma beneath his jaw. 2 of the Driven had cracked ribs and strained joints. The first Korvathi had a fully dislocated primary arm that required surgical realignment. The second Korvathi had ligament damage in its neck from the chokehold. The Huron who took the liver shot had internal bruising that would take a week to heal. The others had various fractures, sprains, and contusions. All 10 would recover. None of them were in danger of dying. The medical officer, a 4-eyed amphibian named Dr. Tesh, noted this in her report with a comment that would later be read aloud in the commandant's office. The human used exactly the amount of force required to incapacitate each opponent. Not more, not less. The injuries, while significant, show a precise understanding of multiple species' anatomies. This was not a loss of control. This was controlled application of violence with deliberate restraint. Recommend further assessment. By midday, Elias was summoned. The office of Academy Commandant Yavara sat at the highest point of the Academy ring, behind a door made of black stone carved with the symbols of the founding species. Elias walked in and stood at attention. The room was large and sparse. A desk, 2 chairs, a wide viewport showing the curve of Verath Prime against the stars. Commandant Yavara was old. She was Korvathi, but age had softened her exoskeleton to a dull gray, and her mandibles moved slowly when she spoke. She had commanded fleets. She had ended wars. She had watched empires rise and collapse. And she was watching Elias now with the patient, unreadable gaze of someone who had seen everything the galaxy could offer and was still, occasionally, surprised. "Sit down, Cadet Voss." Elias sat. Yavara activated a holo display above her desk and played the footage of the fight. She watched it once, in full, without comment. Then she played it again and paused it at the moment Elias struck Toron beneath the jaw. "Tell me what you did here," she said. "Driven have a nerve cluster below the skull plate where the jaw meets the neck," Elias said. "A sharp upward strike to that point causes immediate loss of consciousness. It is similar to a knockout blow in human boxing, but the target is different." And the Korvathi arm dislocation. Their primary arm connects to the thorax through a ball-end socket joint that has a wider range of motion than a human shoulder, but less structural support from the surrounding tissue. A sharp lateral force at the right angle separates the joint. Painful, but it heals cleanly. The Huron liver shot. Huron organ placement is shifted compared to most bipedal species. Their liver sits higher and more forward. A strike to what would be the lower ribs on a human hits the liver directly on a Euron. Yavara stared at him for a long moment. You studied the anatomies of every species in your barracks. Yes, ma'am. Before you arrived at this academy. Yes, ma'am. She closed the holo display and leaned back in her chair. The silence stretched between them. Outside the viewport, a transport ship drifted past, its running lights blinking in the dark. I have read your full file, Cadet Voss, Yavara said. You grew up in the Rio de Janeiro fringe on Earth, one of the most dangerous urban zones on your planet. No parents on record after age 11. You survived on the streets for 6 years before applying to the Union military program. You have been fighting since you were 12 years old. Elia said nothing. You did not come here to escape violence, Yavara continued. You came here to learn how to use it for something better. That is what your application essay said. I read it 3 times before approving your admission. You approved my admission personally, Elias asked. I approve every human admission personally. Your species is still on probation with the Union. Every human who enters this academy reflects on whether your kind will be allowed to stay. She paused. You have made my job considerably harder in the last 12 hours. Elias held her gaze but said nothing. Yavara explained the situation. The fight had created a political problem. Delegations from several species were furious. The Dreven ambassador had filed a formal protest calling humans uncontrollable predators and demanding Elia's immediate removal. Other species were less vocal but equally concerned. A single human had taken down 10 cadets from multiple species in under a minute. The footage was being used as evidence that humanity was too dangerous to be trusted with military training. They want to expel you, Yavara said. Some want to expel all humans from the academy. And what do you want? Elias asked. Yavara regarded him with her ancient, unreadable eyes. The dominance challenge is a tradition this academy has tolerated for centuries. It exists because we believe that leaders must be tested, not by examinations or simulations, but by real pressure. Most cadets who accept a challenge posture and shove. A few actually fight. None in my memory have done what you did last night. She stood and walked to the viewport. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass, old, scarred, and tired. I will not expel you, she said, but I cannot protect you from the consequences either. You will be transferred to the accelerated track, our advanced program. It is designed for senior cadets, not first years. The training is brutal. The failure rate is 70%. If you complete it, your place at this academy is permanent and beyond political challenge. If you fail, you are gone, and I will not be able to bring you back. Elias nodded slowly. When do I start? Tomorrow morning. He stood to leave. At the door, Yavara's voice stopped him. Cadet Voss, the medical report says you used exactly enough force to stop each opponent without causing permanent harm. Every strike was calibrated. Every hold was controlled. She turned from the viewport to face him. Why? You could have done far worse. Elias stood in the doorway, half in shadow, half in the cold light of the office. Because they are my classmates, ma'am, not my enemies, there is a difference. He left, the door closed behind him. Back in Block 7, the world had shifted. Cadets who had ignored Elias for 3 weeks now stepped aside when he walked past. They did not speak to him, not yet, but the body language was different. The casual cruelty had stopped. No one blocked his seat. No one shouldered him in the hall. When Toron was released from the medical bay 2 days later, he walked into the barracks with a bandage around his jaw and a stiffness in his movements that spoke of deep bruising. The room went quiet. Everyone watched. Toron walked straight to Elias' bunk. Elias was sitting on the edge, reading something on his data pad. He looked up. Toron stood there for a long moment. Then he raised his upper right arm and pressed his fist against his own chest, a Dreven salute of recognition. It was not friendship. It was not surrender. It was the acknowledgement that he had been beaten by someone who deserved the victory. Ilias stood and returned the gesture with a simple nod. Toron turned and walked to his own bunk without another word. Something unspoken had passed between them, not warmth, not yet, but the first thread of something that might one day become respect. That evening, Seal found Ilias on the observation deck again. She sat beside him and stared at the stars for a while before speaking. "The empaths who watched the fight," she said quietly, "they sense something that has been bothering them since. Throughout the entire 38 seconds, your emotional state never changed. No rage, no fear, no rush. Nothing. How is that possible?" Ilias was quiet for a long time. When he answered, his voice was low. "Humans learned a long time ago that anger is a luxury in a fight. You feel it later, or you die now." Seal absorbed this. Somewhere across the academy, cadets from dozens of species were pulling up records on their data pads, searching through Earth's history for the first time. What they found in those files, centuries of war, adaptation, endurance, and survival against odds that should have ended the species 10 times over, would keep them awake long into the station's artificial night. 6 months changed a person. The accelerated track changed Ilias Voss in ways that were visible from the outside. He was thinner, harder, and carried new scars on his arms and across his left shoulder where a training exercise had gone wrong. His face had lost whatever softness it once had. He moved differently now, with the kind of economy that comes from being exhausted so many times that the body learns to waste nothing. But the changes beneath the surface were bigger. He had spent 6 months training alongside cadets who had years more experience. The program threw everything at him: advanced combat, tactical theory, survival drills on hostile environments, zero-gravity operations, leadership simulations that ran for days without rest. 70% of those who entered the accelerated track failed. Ilias did not fail. He came close twice. Once when a desert survival exercise nearly killed him from dehydration, and once when a simulated starship breach left him floating in vacuum with a cracked helmet seal for 40 seconds before rescue arrived. He survived both. The other cadets in the program noticed. What surprised them was not his skill, though that improved steadily. What surprised them was his willingness to suffer for others. When a teammate lagged behind on a forced march, Ilias carried their gear. When a driven cadet collapsed from heat exhaustion during a jungle exercise, Ilias stayed with her instead of pushing ahead to improve his own score. When rations ran short during a week-long field deployment, he quietly gave his share to those who needed it more. He did not do these things to be noticed. He did them because it was who he was. The other cadets noticed anyway. Now it was the final exercise, a 72-hour simulated combat scenario on a hostile moon called Verath 6. The moon was real. The environment was real: low gravity, thin atmosphere, freezing temperatures, and rocky terrain that could break an ankle with one wrong step. Only the enemy forces were simulated, projected by drones and hollow emitters scattered across the surface. Ilias was assigned command of a 10-member squad. When he read the roster, he felt something close to amusement. The names included Toron, Seal, a Korvathi cadet named Dren, and several others from Block 7, including 2 who had been among the 9 who rushed him on the common floor 6 months earlier. Someone in the Academy administration had a sense of irony. They deployed at dawn station time. The mission was straightforward on paper: hold a designated outpost position against waves of simulated enemy forces for 3 full days. No resupply, no reinforcements. Whatever they brought with them was all they had. The first 12 hours went well. The squad established defensive positions, set sensor perimeters, and rotated watch shifts. Ilias kept his orders brief and clear. He listened to Toron's input on fortification placement and used Seal's empathic abilities to detect the simulated enemy's approach patterns. Each member of the squad had a role, and Elias made sure each of them knew it mattered. By hour 20, the enemy waves had intensified. The drones were faster, more numerous, and attacked from multiple directions at once. The squad held, but the pressure was constant. Sleep became a luxury. Food was running low. By hour 40, the cracks began to show. A young Dreven named Vec sat down behind a rock formation and refused to move. "This is pointless," he said. "The scenario is designed for us to fail. They want to see how we handle defeat. We should surrender and save our energy." A Corvathi named Brel agreed. "My ammunition is below 20%. We cannot hold for another 32 hours. Others murmured. The cold was getting to them. The thin atmosphere made every breath feel like it was not enough. Toron sat against the outpost wall with a deep gash on his left flank from a drone strike that had gotten too close. He was in pain, though he did his best to hide it. Elias listened to all of them without interrupting. When the complaints died down, he spoke. "You might be right," he said. "Maybe this is designed for us to fail. Maybe the instructors expect us to surrender at hour 40, and they have a lesson prepared about knowing when to retreat. That is a real possibility." He paused and looked around at each of them. 10 faces from 6 different species, all exhausted, all watching him. "But I am not going to surrender. Not because I think we can win. Not because I am too proud to lose. But because every one of you has fought too hard to get here, and you deserve a commander who will stand with you until the end. If we go down swinging. And we go down together." Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Toron pushed himself to his feet with a grunt of pain and picked up his weapon. "Stop talking," Toron said. "Tell us the plan." From that point forward, something shifted in the squad. It was not dramatic. There was no rousing battle cry or sudden surge of energy. They were still tired, still hurt, still low on supplies. But a thread of steel had woven itself through the group, connecting them to each other through the person standing in the middle. Elias took the worst watch shifts. He carried Toron's gear when the Dreven's injury made movement difficult. He gave his remaining rations to Dren, whose Corvathi metabolism was burning through energy faster than anyone else. He did not sleep for the last 26 hours of the exercise. In the final 6 hours, the simulation threw everything it had at them. The enemy waves came without pause from the ground, from the ridgelines, from the thin sky above. The squad's ammunition dropped to near zero. Their positions were overrun twice, and twice they pulled back, regrouped, and counterattacked. At hour 68, with 4 hours remaining, Elias gathered the squad and explained a plan so reckless that Toron stared at him for 10 seconds before responding. "That is insane," Toron said. "I know. It will not work." "It might." Toron looked at the others, they looked at Elias, and one by one they nodded. The plan was simple in concept and terrifying in execution. Instead of defending the outpost, they would abandon it, fall back to a narrow canyon half a kilometer to the east, and funnel the enemy forces into a choke point. They would use their remaining explosives to collapse the canyon walls behind the enemy once they entered, trapping them. Then the squad would pick off what remained. It meant giving up the position they had been ordered to hold. It meant gambling everything on a single move. It meant trusting that the terrain would do what Elias believed it would do. They moved at hour 69. By hour 70 they were in position. The enemy drones followed them into the canyon exactly as Elias had predicted. The explosives fired. The canyon walls came down. And for the next 2 hours the squad held the choke point with almost no ammunition, using rocks, improvised weapons, and sheer refusal to stop. When the 72-hour mark arrived and the simulation ended, all 10 squad members were still standing. Battered, bleeding, half-frozen, running on nothing but willpower and whatever Elias had put into them, but standing. The simulation instructors later admitted in their official report that the canyon strategy had not been among the anticipated solutions. The exercise was, in fact, designed to be unwinnable through conventional defense. No squad in the past 8 years had held the full 72 hours. Ilya's squad did not just hold, they won. The graduation ceremony was held 3 weeks later in the Academy's Great Hall, a vast space with a ceiling that displayed a live feed of the stars outside. Over 1,000 cadets, instructors, and dignitaries filled the tiered seating. The air hummed with the sounds of a dozen languages and the quiet electricity of an event that everyone sensed was different from the years before. Commandant Yevara stood at the central podium and addressed the assembly. She was old and her voice was no longer strong, but every word reached the back of the hall. She spoke about strength and about what the Union had gotten wrong about it for a very long time. She spoke about the assumption that civilized species were tame ones, that peace meant the absence of the ability to cause harm. She argued the opposite. True peace, she said, was built and maintained by those who had the full capacity to destroy and who chose, every single day, not to. She did not mention Ilya's by name. She did not need to. When the accelerated track graduates were called to the stage, Ilya's walked across the polished floor in his dress uniform. He was still thinner than he had been 6 months ago. The scar on his shoulder was visible above his collar. His face was calm. As he crossed the midpoint of the stage, a sound rose from the seating section assigned to Block 7. Toron stood first. He pressed his fist to his chest, the Dreven salute. Then Seal stood. Then Dren. Then Vec. Then the 2 cadets who had once rushed Ilya's on the common floor and had spent the last 72 hours fighting beside him in a frozen canyon. One by one, every member of Block 7 rose and saluted. It was a gesture that had never been given to a human before. Ilya's paused on the stage. He looked at them for a long moment. Then he returned the salute, a simple nod, and continued walking. After the ceremony, when the hall had emptied and the noise had faded, Seal found him on the observation deck. He was standing alone, as he often did, looking out at the stars. The viewport stretched floor to ceiling, and the galaxy spilled across the glass like scattered light. She stood beside him and said nothing for a while. The silence between them was comfortable now, the kind of silence that exists between people who have been through something together and do not need words to acknowledge it. "What are you thinking?" she asked. Ilya's watched a distant star pulse once, faintly, at the edge of the visible spectrum. "Back home," he said, "they told me the galaxy would not want us, that we were too broken, too violent, too human." He paused. The light from the viewport painted half his face in white and left the other half in shadow. "Maybe that is exactly what the galaxy needs." Seal said nothing. She stood beside him and watched the stars. Somewhere across the station and beyond, on data pads and networks, and in the quiet conversations of species who had never thought much about the small blue planet at the edge of Union space, a piece of footage continued to spread. A 19-year-old human standing in a ring of fallen aliens, blood on his lip, calm in his eyes, saying 2 words, "We are done here." It was not a warning, it was an introduction. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same.